Chapter 34. Friends. I have few friends. You could probably classify me as a loner. It's hard to stay in touch with people because we live so far apart. Wolfgang von Ungern-Sternberg in Regensburg, Joey Köchlin in Lima, Uli Bergfelder in Italy and Berlin. Over many years, in many films, Uli did the designs for me. He helped work on the superstructure of the ship in Fitzcarraldo and was often an advance scout, in Australia for instance, for Where the Green Ants Dream. On location, he could always fix anything with an expert touch. Sometimes he travelled for me, to the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan, for instance, where ships are rusting away in the desert that was once the seabed. We had considered it as a possible location for Salt and Fire 2016, but on getting his report, I threw out the idea and filmed instead in the Uyuni salt flats in Bolivia. Uli is a specialist in Provençal poetry, but his home is an old farm estate near Volterra, where he has some 900 olive trees. He restored a crumbling ruin of a farmhouse over many years. Being with him was always lovely and strife-free. You can see him in a cameo role in Nosferatu. When the ghost ship from the Black Sea makes landfall in Wismar, full of innumerable rats, he's the sailor who frees the dead captain who has lashed himself to the wheel with ropes. Also among my friends, I count Herb Golder and Tom Luddy, the film editor Joe Beanie, the cameraman Peter Zeitlinger and his wife Sylvia, my fellow directors Terence Malick, Joshua Oppenheimer, and Ramin Bahrani, all far away, and Angelo Garro, a little closer in San Francisco. Angelo is a blacksmith from Sicily who set up his own forge in San Francisco, but above all, he's a figure from another epoch. He's a hunter and gatherer. He makes his own wine, his own olive oil, his own pasta, prosciutto and sausages. Once or twice a year, he will shoot a wild boar and roast it on coals in his forge. He makes his own spiced salt and Sicilian sauces, following his grandmother's recipes. I made a short film with him for a Kickstarter campaign that became very successful. Every important American cook has been to see him in his forge, and I don't know any of them who don't revere him. With him, everything is good and proper and essential. Also in the circle of my close friends is Werner Janou. Because he and I share the same first name, he now goes by Janou. He grew up dirt poor in the Vogtland in the former German Democratic Republic without his father, who had disappeared in Stalingrad, and Janou worked as a tungsten miner from the age of 14. Conditions were brutally hard, and when he was 19, he tried to flee to the West. He was taken off the S-Bahn heading for West Berlin, having made himself suspicious by carrying all his papers with him. They took his passport away. A couple of days later, he succeeded in fleeing, this time with his twin brother's passport. In Cologne, he worked in a steel rolling mill and in a jam factory on the side. But he wanted to get out into the world. Before long, he had saved enough money to buy himself a bicycle and passage on a ship to Montreal. He had a friend with him, but the friend went home after a few days. Janou bicycled across the North American continent to the Pacific. On the way, he worked as a farmhand and taught himself English from conversations. He was not an analphabet. He could read well, but he has difficulty writing to this day. He then headed south all alone through the United States, Mexico, and Central America, where he learned Spanish and started taking photographs. His pictures from that time have a striking depth, and because he wasn't aware of any trends, they have an expressiveness that is all their own. After 3.5 years on the road, he laid up in Lima, where he worked as a photographer for local papers. I got to meet him through the soccer manager Rudi Gutendorf, who had trained 5 teams in the early days of the Bundesliga, then became a globetrotter working with various national sides all over the world. When I happened to be in Lima for the preparations for Aguirre, I would take part in the fitness training of his team, Sporting Cristal Lima. One day, when the A team was up against the B team, they were a player short, and Gutendorf wrote me down for the B team. What position did I want to play? I said I didn't care, but I wanted to be up against Alberto Gallardo. Gallardo was a Peruvian international winger who was chosen by journalists for the World 11 alongside Pelé and other greats following the 1970 World Cup held in Mexico. Gallardo was a speed freak, a madman who did crazy things on the pitch, who never did what you expected. I wanted to make things hard for him at least, to get in his way, so I frantically tried following him around. After 10 minutes, someone passed the ball to me, and by that stage I could no longer remember which team's shirts were mine and which way we were playing, and after 15 minutes I slunk off the pitch with stomach cramps and vomited for hours into the oleander bushes beside the pitch. Janou pulled me out of the shrubbery, and from that moment we were friends. In Aguirre, you can see him on the raft, spinning around and around in the rapids until Aguirre destroys it with a cannon. Janou is completely primal and self-made, the only person I know who is absolutely and totally not deformed by human society. Janou was also involved in Fitzcarraldo. While the team was away filming somewhere else, he and a girlfriend stayed in the jungle camp to keep the locals from demolishing it for building materials. First time around, he impressed Mick Jagger because his experience had been so unlike anyone else's, and hence his perspective on life was unique as well. He hadn't heard of the Rolling Stones. He repeatedly asked Mick what his name was, and Mick patiently tried to correct him. It's not Nick, it's M, as in mother, Mick. But Janou could never get it right. He said, "Oh right, Nick, as in pain in the nick." Then Janou would bray with laughter like a donkey, and Mick Jagger would chime in, also like a donkey. Janou asked if Nick actually made money from his singing, and would he mind plucking him some tune on his guitar. Mick did so without hesitation with his electric guitar and amp, just for Janou. Later, Janou left Peru for Munich. Before I moved to America, he lived with me in a rented house in Pasing, near Munich. He was a wonderful companion to my little son Rudolf. Years later, to mark Rudolf's coming of age, the 3 of us went to Alaska and had a little seaplane set us down on a lake west of a chain of mountains. We didn't have a tent and built ourselves a shelter. We had an axe, a saw, hammocks, a rubber dinghy, and fishing rods. We had brought some basic provisions with us: rice, noodles, onions, salt, tea, because the nearest habitation was 400 kilometers away. We wouldn't have starved, but we had to find our own berries, mushrooms, and fish. At the end of 6 weeks, the plane came to pick us up. It was such an extraordinary experience. We did it again on a different lake the following year. When I directed Bellini's Norma in 1994 in the Verona Arena, Janou came to visit. His Peruvian girlfriend was working in Bologna at the time, and he went from there to see me. For a few days, he seemed a bit down and introverted, and I finally asked him what the matter was. It turned out that his girlfriend was pregnant, and Janou thought that this was a terrible misfortune. It was morning, and we were in a cafe together right by the arena. I waved the waiter over and ordered a bottle of champagne. How wonderful! He would be a father. There could be no better news. I congratulated him, and we drank to it, and all at once Janou was very excited by the prospect. He married Rosa, his girlfriend, and Gretel, their daughter, is now grown up and independent.